are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Ian Smith. I'm the founder and Managing Director of United States Connect. On behalf of United States Connect and the Export Council, we'd like to welcome you to our monthly webinar on the US market. This week or this month we're actually looking at US warehousing and logistics, and we've actually got two experts in the area all the way from Washington DC and Chicago in Illinois. So we've got Amy Fry, who's in from ATC International, Amy Fry, and she's in Washington DC, and Max Lewis from Import Logistics, he's in Chicago. We'll be working through today what third-party logistics is and how you can set up efficient and effective logistics in the States. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. If you do have questions, please type them into the system as we go through, and we'll answer those at the end. There will be a good opportunity for questions at the end, and that is the value in these sessions. And I'm just going to start out just talking a little bit about distribution options in the States, and we'll then move to the speakers and I'll introduce each. So without further ado, I just wanted to give people a little bit of background on distribution or market entry options in the States. Obviously you all know that the US is a highly complex and competitive market, and taking time to determine the best market entry strategy is going to be crucial to your success. So there's a number of strategies that companies take when they're looking at the US market. You can go direct to consumer, generally through e-commerce, and that will require a warehouse, whether that's a warehouse with someone like Amazon, your own warehouse, or a third-party logistics warehouse to actually fulfill the orders that you're getting direct from consumers. The second option is direct to retail. There are some retailers in the States that will allow you to send product direct, FOB. I'd have to say, in our experience, they're few and far between. Most retailers will require some sort of warehouse in the States, and again, that's where the 3PL may come into play. The third option is using intermediaries, and this is where most companies end up. So a lot of companies that we come across ring us and say, can you please find us a distributor, and that's the go-to place for most Australian and New Zealand companies. It may or may not be the best option in the States. So, particularly in such a competitive market, distributors really don't have to get out of bed in the morning to make money. So actually getting your product seen and heard and sold, more importantly, by distributors can be difficult. The other option is manufacturers' representatives, and they're generally the way business is done in the States. They're like independent sales reps, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. Again, you would require your own warehouse in that case. And other options in terms of market entry, which we won't be going into today, but joint ventures, licensing and franchising. In terms of your standard distributorship, obviously the distributor buys your product and resells. So that's the benefit to companies. Obviously you're getting paid for product. They're doing all the importing, warehousing and distributing, and there is less inventory risk, although most sales will be on terms, so there is some risk there. And the other pro for this model is that they do have established relationships across key sales channels. The cons in terms of distributors, as I said, it is a very competitive marketplace. Distributors might have thousands and thousands of SKUs, so they may not be able to see the tree for the forest. And what I'm saying there is that you're in competition with all their other vendors, so making your product stand out can be very difficult. Obviously your margins are diminished if you go through a distributor. They may take anything from 40 to 70% margin, and you also have less control over your product and customer base. So if you happen to change distributors, you've got to start the process again, potentially with those customers that you've built up over that time. In terms of manufacturers' representatives, as I said, it's still very much the way business is done in the States, and even large companies will have independent sales reps working for them. They're generally paid on a straight commission, although there may be a retainer up front, and that commission is generally 5 to 10%. And they generally work a particular territory or region or industry, and in some cases they may even work particular retailers. So it's due to the size of the US market, the competitive nature, that it's not like Australia or New Zealand where reps are covering a whole state. For example, we work with 2 rep groups out of Minneapolis who sell direct to Target. They've got about 100 staff each, and their job is specifically to sell to Target. Unlike distributors, reps do not take ownership of the products, so that's where a third-party logistics solution would come into play. You would set up and send across your product, host it in a third-party logistics facility, and then send it out to customers that have been found and secured by those independent reps. One of the cons of manufacturers' representatives, or it's more one of the challenges, is finding good operators. So generally those people that talk a big game and drop a lot of names are not necessarily the best reps, but generally by going to trade shows and talking to colleagues that have been there and done it, you'll be able to find good operators. So that's just a general overview, and I thought I'd just give a good flavour as to your market entry options when you're going to the States, and also gives it's a nice segue into talking about third-party logistics and what that's all about. So I'm now going to hand over to Max Lewis, and Max is from Import Logistics. He's Vice President of Sales and Marketing. He was actually born in Berkshire, England, and relocated to Chicago in 1983 with an automotive company. His association with Import Logistics goes back more than 30 years, as the company was the logistical partner originally for all imported products he was responsible for when he came to the States. Import Logistics was established in 1971, and they continue to excel in managing long-distance cross-border supply chains for overseas companies. Max and Import Logistics has worked with over 50 Australian and New Zealand companies over the last 15 years to enter the US market and grow sales. So without further ado, I'd just like to hand over Max, and just a reminder that if you've got any questions as we go along, please enter them into the system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian, and good morning, everybody. First slide, please, Ian. Ian, can you? There you go. Okay. Ian sort of finished on the term third-party logistics. So exactly what does that mean? Well, it does depend actually on who you ask and where you look. If I put the standard definition up there on that slide, what it basically means is that you're outsourcing your logistical needs to a specialist company. Next one, please, Ian. Okay, and that specialist company is called a third-party logistics provider, or the more common term would be a 3PL. And what they're doing is taking no responsibility for part of all of the supply chain. And it can be fairly complicated and fairly long. My graphic at the bottom there doesn't really do it justice. But what they're really doing is bridging the gap between the manufacturer, you, and getting your product all the way to your customer, wherever he or she happens to be based. And there's a lot that can happen, a lot of different things in the procedure all the way along that supply chain. Next one, please, Ian. Right, there's various types of 3PL providers. They normally fall into 2 different categories. The first 3 there, the standard provider, service developer, and the custom adapter, tend to be sort of system driven, which means they sort of have set procedures, set paperwork, systems, that sort of thing. There's one that really they describe as a customer developer, and they tend to be much more proactive, and they'll work with a company, try and find out what their needs and what their aspirations are, and try and put a system in place to really meet those needs better than the standard sort of providers will be able to offer. Next one, please, Ian. Okay, so why would you use a third-party logistics company or a 3PL? Ian went through many of the things to consider and perhaps the challenges, but I just put a couple up here in that you could obviously manage completely from your home country, but you are going to be a long way from home. You can look to form a joint venture or a JV. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. The biggest problem is finding a good fit, and you know, from our experience, the 50-50 ones tend not to work very well, and most of them don't end well after a couple of years. You could use a fee-paying warehouse, of course, or even set up your own US subsidiary. But both of those come with fixed costs, many times a long-term contract. If you set up a US subsidiary, you're going to be liable for some tax with the US government. So there's high risk and potentially high cost there. Okay, I've already got the next one. Thanks, Ian. So what should you really consider when you're coming to the States? You want to really do business over here. Cultural differences. We speak the same language, but there are a lot of differences, and I think sometimes you sort of get a false sense of security when you come here. This is a foreign country for us English speakers. I've been in this country over 30 years now, and even now, someone will say something or read something or see something that shocks me. So, you know, you have to remember you're in a foreign country. Everything is different. Again, distance and time. It's a long way. There are lots of implications with that, with freight forwarding, with getting the product here. What are your sales expectations in the United States? Obviously, you need to be realistic. We do talk to people that I found sometimes have unrealistic expectations. Their product sells well in their home market or their adjacent markets, but doesn't always sell well over here for many, many reasons. Sales and support. You need to consider what service and what support you can give your customers over here. It is a large country and different time zones, just like Australia. Exchange rate. Nearly every company I've ever dealt with, other than Caterpillar Tractor, wants to deal in US dollars. So you're going to be subject to exchange rate fluctuations. So usually the customers over here are not too interested in what currency you use back home. You've got to compete with local US competition. Everybody wants to pay in US dollars. Likely going to need inventory. What is the cost of the inventory? Other thing really regarding inventory is how your competitors going to react. How are they going to respond to your activities in the United States? Next one, Ian, please. So what do the customers tend to expect when you do business with them in the United States? Local inventory is usually very, very important. I've dealt with auto companies over the years. Most of those are on JIT systems now, just in time. You are going to need to have inventory here. A lot of people I talk to that come to trade shows, they maybe have a booth here, or they talk to potential customers. One of the first questions they're asked is, are you going to have a warehouse? Are you going to have inventory in the United States? Again, you know, how are you going to support your business here? Most people want to know they can talk to somebody. They need a voice. They need local support. Many of your customers really want to be able to return goods. If there's a quality issue or if something's happened or something goes wrong, they want to know where they return the goods. If you're manufacturing in Australia or China or wherever, you don't really want to send the product all the way back there until you've identified what the problem is. So having somewhere local to return those goods is usually a very good option. In fact, quite a few people that we deal with, one of them in particular, Bed Bath & Beyond, they have a policy that their customers can return anything for any reason whatsoever. And that's going to go back to the supplier. Bed Bath & Beyond have that policy, but you will have signed into that. So the parts are yours when they come back. Same-day service, I think Ian did touch on that a little bit when he went through his presentation. If you're dealing with Amazon and e-commerce, it's critical that you're going to get the parts out very, very quickly. Maybe you have to accept an order up to, say, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon and ship that same day. And, of course, with that comes all the specific tracking information. Many companies, big box stores, say Walmart, Kmart, Home Depot, they want ASNs. Obviously, all the automotive companies do as well. So that has to go, and the tracking information is critical to all those companies. So maybe a 3PL or a third-party logistics company is a good option for you. Next one, please, Ian. Okay, so going back, 3PL, you have system-driven companies. And again, I said earlier on that normally you're subjected to standard sort of systems and procedures. They tend not to be too flexible, tend to be very, very large companies. And I put some examples down here. Typically companies like DHL, FedEx, and UPS. And you may not get the personal service that you require. And normally packaging and that sort of thing is fairly standard. Next one, please, Ian. Okay, so let's go to what we described as a customer developer. They will tend to be more flexible and should sit down with you and discuss your specific needs and your specific requirements, and really try and find out what your aims are in the United States and work with you to try and meet those needs. They'll offer many services, and they could be offered individually or as a package, and they certainly will include freight forwarding. They can set up freight forwarding to get your product from a manufacturing plant or a port into a warehouse over here, or direct to your customer if that's what you want them to do. Many of them will offer custom house brokerage services, so you'll need a broker to get your product into the United States. The 3PL will need your power of attorney. You're not handing over any ownership of the product, but they become the consignee and are allowed to import the product on your behalf. Normally offer warehousing and inventory control of your product and discuss buffer levels. And customer service, material management, which really means you have a local contact in the United States. And that would include liaison, often the order point with your customer, often sending out invoices. Many companies over here want them sent out electronically. And many 3PLs will be able to offer office space as well. If you want to send over salespeople or employ anybody over here, they will offer you a facility, perhaps to offer a workstation or a private office. So, as I say, you know, some people want to cherry pick, some people want a whole package of support, but a 3PL will be able to help you and steer you through many of these. So, many issues and decisions to make when you come to the US. Of course, cost is always the top one, isn't it? It's a driver for everybody. Distance, as I said, you're a long way from home. The goods have a long way to travel. The supply chain is very long and can be very complicated. Demographics, I think the US and Australia probably similar distances. But the demographics in the States are slightly different in that population is spread over, more of the country, different from Australia. So you're going to be dealing with people and dealing with customers, I imagine, all the way across the country, many times in every state. So you could be drop shipping to an individual, you could be sending product to a DC or a store, many different variations, but you could be dealing with everybody in lots and lots of different states all over the country. What are your sales expectations and how are your competitors going to respond? What sort of market share are you looking at? I put customs regulations, again, depending on what sort of product you're manufacturing and selling in the United States. There could be some FDA requirements for foodstuffs. Perhaps there'll be some insurance along with really any product. There could be duty depending on where you manufacture the product. But customs can be, or not can be, they're very, very strict. You have to get the paperwork right. You have to make sure everything is in line. The last thing you want is for your pallet or your container to be held up in customs. I put local and tax, federal tax liability. If you do get into having to pay tax on your product in the United States, it can be very, very complicated and that can be difficult. We're subjected over here to county, state and federal taxes. And the tax people want their cut very, very quickly after you've made a sale. And it can be a little bit difficult area to navigate through without some help. Okay, I think this is the last slide I have here. So, a 3PL, third-party logistics, can help you and guide you on your journey into the United States and support you. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much, Ian. And that's the last slide I have.
Thanks, Max. That was great. We are getting a few questions through, so we'll bring those forward at the end after we've heard from Amy. So I just want to introduce Amy. She's another of our service providers, and Max and Amy are both listed on United States Connect, and you can connect with them through our site. Amy is the President and CEO of ATC International. Her association with Australian business began in 1989 when she was hired as an export advisor for the Victorian government. After living and working in Melbourne for 2 years, Amy returned to the US and formed ATC International. Following a few years of consulting and selling in the consumer products industry, Amy introduced ATC's 3PL services specifically to assist Australian and New Zealand companies. Today, ATC focuses entirely on 3PL services and ships hundreds of orders per day to US distributors, retailers and direct-to-consumer. Based on her more than 25 years of experience in working with Australian and New Zealand companies, as well as her many years as a warehouse owner and operator, Amy offers a wealth of experience in how to succeed in doing business in the US marketplace. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Amy and we'll hear from her. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, United States Connect, as well as Lisa McCauley and the Export Council of Australia for organizing this event this morning. Good morning, everyone. My portion of this webinar is going to be to discuss warehousing as it relates, or third-party logistics really, as it relates to B2B and B2C business. I'll talk a little bit about storage and coding, service requirements, shipping, and freight. And if you're a first-time user of 3PL services or one that has been familiar with using a 3PL in the past, hopefully you'll find some insights and tips in particular as it relates to working with the U.S. third-party logistics businesses. Next slide, please. Business-to-business definition, B2B, is commercial transactions between two or more businesses, such as between a manufacturer and a wholesaler or between a wholesaler and a retailer. Typically, these are larger orders when it comes to the warehousing. Next slide, please. Business to consumer, or B2C, represents business or transactions conducted directly between a company and consumers who are the end users of its products or services. And that really relates to smaller orders that are a lot more time sensitive. The next slide here discusses one of the first areas of warehousing that really makes a difference to the way we handle things. And it is the unit of measure that's being used when a person in a warehouse is deciding how and what to pick for your order. In a B2B scenario, it could be 1 carton equals 1 unit to pick. And in a B2C scenario, very often it's 1 piece representing 1 unit of what to pick. Next slide, please. Another area of warehouse terminology that really helps us to define how items are identified for inventory and how we pick items when orders are sent through is a stock keeping unit, an SKU. Now in the warehousing business, an SKU is very, very specific, and the more specific we can be, the more accurate we are. Stock keeping units get down to the item, the color, the size, the expiry date. Now in this example here on this slide, I show one wind cheater, or sweatshirt as we say in America, in 9 colors. If that also is offered over, say, 3 sizes, this particular item is actually 27 SKUs, and that would be 9 colors over 3 sizes. Every SKU having its own pick bin in the warehouse. Next slide, please. SKUs are also defined by things such as the label on a product, and over on the right-hand side of this slide you'll see there's an example, and actually this is a live example from our warehouse. We handle a supplier of men's underwear, and they had changed, their factory had changed the banding on one of the products. The product itself remained the same, but the color of the band changed. And that really created quite a lot of havoc. For one thing, it was shipped under the same item code, and everything about it was the same, except it had a different color band. When it was shipped out direct to consumer, the consumers saw it as a product that did not match what they had originally ordered. So you always want, in a B2C environment, the product to match the picture or the image. And in a warehousing environment, that item that had a different color band should get a separate SKU. Now over on the left-hand side, I've given an example of socks. And actually, one of our oldest clients that we've been working with for over 20 years, began out of a small country factory in Kyneton, Victoria, and today they ship hundreds of thousands of pairs into the United States market. And we are handling both their wholesale as well as their direct-to-consumer shipping for them. We have product that is packaged for direct-to-consumer in individual poly bags, as you can see in the picture on the slide. Those socks are individually wrapped, and in the United States, when you're shipping clothing direct-to-consumer, it should be in a poly bag. That is by U.S. law. Now, when we hold those socks in our warehouse, we have created separate SKUs for the items that are individually wrapped in poly bags versus the product that we hold for their wholesale shipping, which is actually packed in 3-pair packs. So another definition for the SKU is the quantity in which it's packed. Next slide, please. Barcoding in the United States, and no warehousing conversation is complete without this little tidbit of info. In the U.S., we use UPC barcodes, which are a 12-digit barcode, and in Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and probably most other places in the world, the barcode is what's called an EAN, and it is a 13-digit barcode. Now, in the United States, big box retailers and warehouses are all supposed to be ready, willing, and able to read the EAN code. But de facto is that most of the, or many, I should say, of the larger retailers and possibly some warehouses may have trouble reading an EAN code. So you want to be prepared to convert your codes to UPCs. And of course, the least costly way to do that is at the factory level, not by the time it gets to the warehouse. Next slide, please. Looking at service requirements and comparing a B2B versus a B2C when it comes to other aspects of warehousing, I'm going to go down the B2B column first. And the first is order transmission. How do the orders get to the warehouse? Well, it can be manually entered into the warehouse's system. It can come to the warehouse through EDI, or it can be electronically integrated so that your system is feeding directly into the warehouse's system. In a B2B environment, timing of when to ship orders is anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks. It could be longer in some instances. In a B2B environment, tracking information is sometimes not required, or as Max mentioned, you may have to send an ASN, or tracking can be sent by EDI. In a B2B environment, returns are more occasional, and other services that may be required are, again, EDI, barcoding, packing in a specific way, or carton labeling such as a UCC 128. I also want to just say that EDI in the United States is a very different system to the EDI system in Australia. Looking down the B2C column, and we talk about order transition, the best way for B2C orders to get to a warehouse are electronically. So the warehouse is actually integrated with the web system, and the orders are downloaded automatically into the warehouse's system. Timing for shipping out orders is either same day, 1 day, or 2 days. Tracking, the expectation is that the customer will receive tracking information on date of dispatch. Returns, you can expect them to be frequent. Anywhere up to 10% of all orders may be returned, and it is absolutely a part of doing business in the B2C U.S. environment. Other services in the B2C category that warehouses get involved in is shipping, again, putting items into poly bags for shipping, gift wrapping, including personalized cards, shipping next day air or highly expedited orders, and some other forms of customer service where people just want to call someone and talk to them. Now, before we move on, I want to raise an example. We had a very exciting situation a few years ago where one of our clients was able, they got on the wish list for Oprah Winfrey's television show at Christmas time, and the item was listed as one of the top best Christmas presents. Initially, we were shipping somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 50 direct-to-consumer or B2C orders for that client per week. Overnight, after that Oprah show, we woke up in the next morning, there was anywhere from 500 to 700 orders per day that started to come through. And we really weren't ready for it. The situation wasn't set up to have orders automatically downloaded. And essentially, it was a great situation, but would have been good to be a little more prepared for it. So communication with that warehouse and getting ready for national promotions is something that's really important in the B2C area especially. We've shifted over here to freight and shipping, and I'll go down the B2B column again first. In shipping cost, in a B2B environment, the customer will pay very often when it's consumer products, and you may be shipping on the customer's freight account. The selection of carriers that you would use in a B2B shipment would be UPS or FedEx Ground and miscellaneous freight carriers that come up with the best pricing. In terms of returns, they are less frequent, but it's still important to specify what your terms are to your customers up front and typically with your prices. In international orders, make sure that your warehouse is able to handle shipping internationally, and note that if you're shipping a high-value B2B order, it may require the involvement of an international forwarder. In a B2C environment, your shipping costs are generally paid for by the seller, and that would be you, either some or all of the shipping costs. And the selection of a carrier is most commonly the U.S. Postal Service, UPS, and FedEx Ground, one of those three. Returns in a B2C environment, as already mentioned, are part of the cost of doing business. But it's important to specify what your returns are up front and usually on your website, or make sure that you're clear with the e-tailer that you're dealing with. Make sure that the cost to process the B2C return are worth it. So do you actually want the customer to send the item back at your cost to ship it, as well as your cost for the warehouse to receive it, and then determine whether it goes into damages or back into stock? That's just something to consider. Many orders in a B2C environment are sent out with a return label already included in the box, just in case the customer wants to return it. And finally, in a B2C scenario, when you're shipping international orders, they're often easier to ship because they're low value. And generally, if you can, it's best to ship them via the U.S. Postal Service whenever possible. However, some countries are not actually able to be shipped via U.S. Postal Service, in which case the higher cost UPS or FedEx would be required to get it there. Next slide, please. Some final tips and just a wrap up on what I discussed here today. Make sure that when you're labeling both your products and your cartons that you're labeling them accurately and clearly. You want to make it as easy for those folks in the warehouse on the other side of the world to understand what one item is and what one pick involves as you possibly can. Make sure you pack sensibly and carefully. If you have fragile items our rule of thumb here in the United States is, can you take that box and drop it from your shoulders, and will that item survive being dropped that distance? If it will, then it's packed okay. If it won't, you want to go back to the drawing board and pack it up a little tighter. The more you can do at your side of the equation or on the factory level and not have the warehouse have to add things to your items and products, the less expensive your warehousing services will be. You want to consider all costs whenever you're making these decisions, and in referring to costs, I'm talking about the EDI, I'm talking about the returns processing, and of course possibly bearing the cost of shipping. And then in the final analysis, research your warehouses. There's a lot of 3PLs in the United States, and we all do a variety of different types of services. Make sure that the services that the warehouses that you're talking to, make sure that the warehouses that you're talking to are able to provide the services that you're looking for. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Amy. That was fantastic. We will now take some questions, and I'd encourage people, if they do have more questions, I've got a few here, but if you've got more questions, please send them through. And we'll start with one from Wendy. So do we need to set up a US company to actually use a 3PL? So Amy and Max, if you could just answer that, that'd be great.
Yeah, could I answer it first? Most of the people that we do business with in the US do not have a US corporation, and you don't actually need one to do business over here. Once you decide that you want a US corporation, and then you are going to be liable for all the taxes that we enjoy ourselves over here. But one thing that is to consider is if you're going to employ people directly. If you're going to use a manufacturer's rep or wholesaler or distributor, then theoretically there is no need to form a US corporation. If you're going to employ people directly that are on your payroll, then you do.
And I'll just add a little bit to that, if I may. In the B2C environment, tax liability does enter into it. So setting up a U.S. company is something that eventually it does make good sense to do it. In my humble opinion, it does help expedite the import process. It enables you to get a bank account a lot more readily, and when you're dealing with some of the larger retailers, they do insist upon things like liability insurance and a federal ID number. So from time to time it does make good sense to set up that company, and I encourage you to do a lot of research in terms of talking to accountants and lawyers as well to get the full answer to that question.
And just adding to that, so if people are looking for some advice, we've got some of our rated service providers are those accountants and lawyers. And as Max and Amy have said, it will be a transition, so you may start out without a US company, but it may make sense down the track. Just following on from that, one of the big issues that we see companies face is setting up a bank account. Is that something that 3PLs can help facilitate?
Yeah, we normally apply on behalf of our client for an EIN number. Tax ID number. It's just basically filling out a form, and we'll submit it. And then once you get that number back, then you can apply for US bank account. And you don't need to form a US corporation to have a bank account over here, but you will need this tax ID EIN number, and that's really just submitting a form to the tax people.
Okay. This is from Gary, is there a specific location in the States that has better logistical benefits? For example, is there a location in the States where you can access the whole US market from a particular place? If you're, for example, servicing e-commerce, if they want next day delivery, what's your advice on that? We might go to you first, Amy.
I do believe that it depends on what you're shipping and what your priorities are for getting the product into the market. There's a lot of different great locations in the States. We have a warehouse based in Los Angeles because it's the first port of entry, and it does enable us to get the goods faster and then onto ship onto wherever they need to go. In the U.S., again, with consumer products, generally speaking, the retailer will pay in a wholesale environment the freight from a U.S. location to their store or door. So again, it doesn't really, add to the cost to be a great distance, but timing is something that is of the essence. So the other thing is, if you've got very large and bulky items, then the freight question does actually have a little bit more of a role to play in deciding where to set up. But I think it's in some ways a very personal decision to make as to where you'd like to set your 3PL up or your warehouse up.
Max, from a B2B perspective, what are your thoughts on that in terms of setting up?
Yeah, I mean, we're in Chicago, and hopefully everyone that's on the webinar here knows where Chicago is. It's in the middle of the country. We're in the Midwest, and we were set up by a parent company many years ago because of location, and the businesses that they were looking at and doing business with were basically in this part of the country. I mean, it's debatable. Depending on who you talk to, you may get different answers. For our client base, this appears to be the best place to be. Nearly all of our clients or customers are dealing with people in every state of the U.S., East Coast, West Coast, and many in the middle here. And again, it goes back to the demographics of the country, which is slightly different from Australia. So again, for us, for our client base, for who we're dealing with, it makes sense to be in the Midwest, and certainly Chicago because of the road, the rail, and O'Hare Airport and everything that goes along with that.
So just following on from that, Max, Stevens asked which 3PL companies would be a best fit for a large product distribution in Texas. I mean, does it matter where the 3PL is based? If you're selling throughout Texas, do you necessarily need to have your 3PL in Texas, or assuming that your business is going to grow, it's probably okay to have it somewhere else?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're only doing business in Texas, then have your warehouse in Texas. But for people we deal with, they're looking at growing their business all across the states. Of course, it depends very much on the type of product, the type of business you're involved with. I mean, if you're purely looking at the automotive, car industry, heavy-duty diesel, then there's certain places you need to be. If you're only dealing with Ford, Chrysler, and GM, then perhaps you should be in Detroit. But if your business is your potential customer base is not just in one area, then to us it makes more sense to have access to the whole country. But it really depends on what your market strategy is, what your potential customer base is.
Okay, thanks, Max. Amy, Deniers asked, what is the process for changing barcodes? And I think he means what is the difference between the two barcoding systems, and how would he go about making those changes specifically for the US?
Sure, that's a great question. The UCC Council, the people that issue barcodes, or the company that you purchased the EAN barcodes originally from, will provide you with UPC codes if you need them.
Okay, fantastic. Claire Matthews has basically said that timing is everything. When to commence warehousing in the US? Is there a way around the fixed cost of storing goods sitting there, waiting for orders, or are there options to pay initially when things are picked, packed and shipped? Maybe if we start with you, Amy, and come back to Max.
My opinion is that I'm a big believer in lean and mean when it comes to your stock holdings in the United States market initially. Although there are 310 million now, I think, people in the United States, and certainly 1% of that would represent quite a bit of customers. it does take a while to get that up and running. And one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen over the many years of our Australian and New Zealand clients make are that they put too much stock in the warehouse initially. So I'm always an advocate of start out small and grow your stock holdings as you see your sales increase, because it does take a little time to get it up and running.
Max?
Yeah, I think again it depends on who you're dealing with and what your market is. I mean, if for example you're in the OE business and you're dealing with a Ford Motor Company, they won't even consider you as a supplier until you sign a contract that says you'll have every part number available that they might want for the next 12 months in your warehouse. There's a fine line between what your customer wants or expects as inventory, and as Amy said, it comes down to cost, and you want to be lean and mean. And of course, remember that your inventory is in a warehouse in the United States. It's also on the water. So if it takes 4 weeks to get from Australia or China into your warehouse, that's another 3 or 4 weeks of inventory you've got, which is very costly. But again, I think it depends on what sort of business model you're working with, and what sort of customers you're dealing with and what their expectations are. You may find a 3PL can be flexible in the way they do business with you. Their business model may vary. They may charge you for the warehouse space per pallet. They may be able to work another deal with you, as we have in many cases, and only charge for the space you use when you make a sale. So again, it many factors depends on your product, who you're dealing with, what your potential market is, and what you set up in the United States. If you're using a 3PL, the flexibility that they've got and the business model they've got, and perhaps you can work something out with them, to keep the warehouse costs down until you make a sale.
Thanks, Max. That's great. Another really good question from Gary. Is there somewhere we can get details about local and federal taxes? So, I assume specifically relating to, is there, if you're warehousing in a 3PL, what happens with the tax when you sell into different states around the US? Who'd like to take that one?
Okay, I will. It's very complicated. Depends really how you set your business up. If you don't have a US corporation, you should not be liable for taxes over here. If you do have a US corporation, you will be. And the taxes vary drastically. There's county tax, local tax, there's state tax, and there's federal tax. I live 30 miles away from the office, and when I buy fuel for my car, it's more expensive where I live than where the office is, because the county tax is more where my house is compared with the county where the office is. So these are things really to consider, but you need to get help from a tax accountant. Again, it can be a minefield if you're not careful, but you need to get it right. The tax people over here are very, very strict. The IRS you have to fill out the necessary forms, and often when you make a sale you have to return the tax very, very quickly as well, and there are penalties if you don't. So get proper tax advice from a tax accountant in the United States.
And if I could add to that, Ian, what Max said, and that was great, Max. I would also like to say that from a B2C, when you're shipping and selling direct to consumer, having stock in a warehouse actually then does create what they call nexus, and that's that you actually are participating as a player in the market, and it leaves you subject to sales tax. The way it works in e-commerce, very, very generally, and I want to emphasize what Max said, you should consult a U.S. accountant for further info, but the sales taxes often levied on the state level, and it is only levied on a sale directly to consumers. So we don't have a VAT or a GST in the States. We have a sales tax that comes in at the state level. So the B2C environment is really where I think it's very important to take a close look at what the ramifications are in terms of sales tax.
Amy, we've got one last question, and it relates to EDI. You said that varied between the States and Australia. How so?
Well, in the U.S., it starts with the UPC versus the EAN, but in typically in the States, EDI is not actually directly communicating between the retailer and the supplier, whereas I believe in Australia the setup is a little bit more direct. We have things called electronic catalogs where retailers can go and pick and choose item codes and pricing and so forth from the electronic catalog to populate an EDI order. And those two things tend to make the system less like what one is dealing with in Australia or New Zealand than more like it.
Okay, fantastic. And just from my perspective, we've finished all the questions now. There are some we'll take on notice, which are a bit more specific in nature, and I'll send those through and get answers out. But just from my perspective, I've dealt with both Amy and Max for many years in my role as Trade Commissioner in the States, but also in the 10 years that I've been dealing in and with the States, and both of them have done a fantastic job for Australian and New Zealand companies. And they're both, as I say, listed on United States Connect. Just a little plug for the website. It is free to join, so there's absolutely no obligation in joining. There's about 50,000 words of content on every aspect of doing business in the States. And most importantly, there's service providers like Max and Amy who've been rated on their service by other exporters, so you know that they're going to do a good job. We talked a little bit about tax accountants. We've got tax accountants listed on the site and are specialists in that area. We've got lawyers if you want to set up a company. We've even got e-commerce specialists and friendly banks who will let you set up an account. So please, if you haven't already, please register, and I'm happy to have a one-on-one chat with you about your US plans, and I'm sure that Amy and Max will do the same. You can connect with them through the site, read a little bit more about their businesses and see what other exporters have rated them. So thanks very much, Amy and Max, for taking the time on your Monday evening. Really appreciate it. I think it was a great session and we got a lot out of it. So thanks for your time, and we'll see you all next month for the next webinar.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone.